He said, "Eat it off the ground." Nina heard the words like a stone against a window, and the glass did not shatter, but something inside of me did, right there at the dining table where my family had gathered to celebrate my promotion. The plate slipped from my hands, icing splattered across my shoes, and a smear of white hung like a map on the tablecloth. And Jason laughed like it was the punchline of a long-rehearsed joke. I stood very still, fingers sticky with frosting, the metal of the fork cold against my palm, and did nothing. I did not shout back. I did not make a scene. I put the plate on the sink and walked out of the kitchen with the sound of their laughter following me like wind. The barbecue smelled of char and olive oil, the porch light warmed the wood in a soft yellow, and my nephew Mateo was at the edge of the yard kicking at a stone as if nothing had happened. My phone buzzed while I was on the porch. A group chat lit up with a single line: "Cut contact with Nina. No explanation, no apology." I typed one sentence at 3 in the morning. It was not revenge. It was a boundary. I wrote, "I will not be the responsible one anymore." The next day, I would go to the bank. I grew up as the person everyone named responsible, the one who signed forms, answered texts at midnight, drove relatives to appointments, and kept receipts in a box labeled family. My mother Linda used to say, "You are steady like a stone," and meant it as a compliment. Claire, my sister, learned to lean on me when bills came due, and when she moved cities, I signed a lease for her that became a chain around my ankle. In high school, I worked at a diner and saved every tip for college, the smell of coffee and frying oil teaching me patience and thrift. At 22, I co-signed a small loan for Jason so he could fix his car, and I believed the word family meant trust without paper. I carried one scar from my 20s, a thin white line on my forearm from when I rushed into the rain to save an old friend, and ended up with stitches and a lesson about people who ask for help and forget to say thank you. That pattern of giving and quiet acceptance followed me into adulthood. It connected directly to the moment at the table where frosting on my shoe was more than icing. It was proof that being generous had made me invisible. I realized that what felt like duty had real costs, and those costs were written down in contracts and monthly statements that I had never fully read. That realization tightened my chest and opened the only clear decision in the fog. I would pull an inventory. I sat at my kitchen table, the wood grain low and familiar under my palms, and opened a folder I had avoided for years. There were 5 envelopes, 3 loan statements with my name on the top, a car title that listed me as co-signed owner, and a utility bill showing my address, though Claire had lived there for months. The paper smelled faintly of dust and coffee, the numbers rigid and impersonal, the totals like a second language that translated to anxiety. I called my friend Maria and left a message because I could not trust my voice yet. I wrote down every creditor, understanding finally that the phrase co-signed meant legally responsible, not just morally tasked. I saw an auto loan from Riverside Auto with overdue notices, a personal loan from a local credit union, a small business line that listed me as guarantor, and a credit card that had been used for groceries and plane tickets I had never taken. The betrayal was twofold: the emotional insult at dinner and the financial architecture built behind my back. My hands trembled when I dialed the bank, and the keypad felt slick with sweat. I sent an email to Denise, an attorney I found online who specialized in consumer rights and family financial disputes. I told her plainly, "This is what happened," and asked what is the fastest way to be released. She replied in an hour with a calm list of steps and a time to meet. I put my coffee cup down and tasted the bitterness like a promise. I would stop being responsible for what they had taken for granted. At the bank, I sat across from Mark, my assigned banker, in a room that smelled of lemon cleaner and paper. The fluorescent light hummed with a steady, indifferent tone. I laid out my copies, pointed at account numbers, and described each co-signed loan while Mark typed and clicked in a rhythm that felt official. Conversation followed a long, measured cadence. I said, I want to be released from these obligations. He said, releases are possible but involve documentation and creditor agreement. I asked, is there a penalty? And he said, sometimes a fee or a reassessment of interest. I said, what about the car title? And he said, title transfers require signatures or a court order. I asked, can you file a discharge? And he said, I will need notarized evidence and an explanation of circumstances. I asked, how long does this take? And he said, typically 4 to 6 weeks, but cases where fraud or coercion is suspected can be expedited. I asked, what proof do you need? And he said, bank will accept a police report corroborated with communication logs and a legal affidavit. I asked, will this affect my credit? And he said, potentially temporarily, but a successful release can mitigate long-term damage. I asked, do I need a lawyer? And he said, it helps to have counsel for negotiations. I asked, is there an emergency procedure? And he said, some institutions will place a temporary forbearance while evidence is reviewed. The dialogue stretched with 8 clear turns, and each answer landed like a step on a staircase that might lead out. The room had 5 sensory details that kept me grounded: the lemon scent, the cloth of the chairs under my palms, the click of the keyboard, the pale blue of the bank brochure, the slight metallic tang of the paperclip holding my documents. Mark explained terms in plain language that felt like a gift. A forbearance is a pause, he said. A release is a legal disentanglement. I left with a checklist and the word release etched into my mind like a destination. The confrontation came later at my apartment door when I found Jason standing there while rain threaded down the glass. He barged in without knocking, boots wet, eyes sharp, and the apartment smelled of damp jackets and cologne that masked something metallic like anger. He said, "You gonna pay my loan because you always do." And I said, "No, I am not." The exchange became a small storm. He said, "You signed for me. You are responsible." I said, "Being responsible is not a free pass to be treated poorly." He said, "You always make us look good. Why change now?" I said, "I am not a credit line." He laughed and said, "Eat it off the ground," meaning the plate earlier, and worse. I felt my jaw tighten and the air in the room became thick with the sound of an argument about to break. I pulled out my phone and started recording. He said, "Stop recording," and I said, "I am documenting what is happening." He said, "You are going to regret this," and I said, "If regret means not shouldering someone else's debt, then fine." The conversation lasted long enough to be a turning point, and the recorded audio became proof. There were 5 senses present: the slap of rain on the window, the smell of his jacket, the cold linoleum under my feet, his voice rough like gravel, and the metallic click of my phone recording. I texted Officer Ramirez, the non-emergency line, and described the intimidation. She called me calmly and said, "Bring any evidence and we will file a report." I asked, "Will this help with the bank?" And she said, "Police reports can support claims of coercion." I saved the recording, uploaded it to a secure drive, and felt a small lightness, like a window opened a bit in a room that had been shut. At roughly 1/3 of the way into this story, after I had sorted papers and saved the recording, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If you have ever been called responsible to your face and invisible in your home, please share one word below that describes how that felt. Start with "when I realized" and write one sentence so we can see patterns and help each other. Your words matter because they map what isolation looks like, and they help me decide what resources to share next. Comments here build community, and they help others know they are not alone. Thank you for adding your voice. The online reaction swelled after parts of the story leaked a clip of my recording in a photo of the plate splattered with icing found their way into a family group that was then reposted by a cousin Eric and a neighbor Ruth. Social media had its own smell, the metallic sting of notifications and the low hum of strangers weighing in. Some comments were cruel, some were helpful. A few people called me dramatic. Others offered to connect me with advocates and a credit counseling service. My colleague Mark from work sent a private message offering temporary financial support until the bank processing finished. My friend Claire messaged from across town and said, "I am sorry, I never saw it." My mother Linda called and said, "We can talk." The volume of voices tested my resolve, and the sensation of exposure was sharp. I responded in measured tones rather than emotion. I asked for specific help, not sympathy. When a local reporter called, I declined to comment until the bank and police work were complete. I drafted one public post that acknowledged pain, outlined steps I had taken, and shared links to a consumer protection hotline. I named my attorney Denise, who had been methodical and steady. The screen showed 100 missed calls from unknown numbers in the hours after the audio circulated, and each missed call rang in my head like a tiny accusation. I did not pick up most of them. I filtered calls, I changed voicemail to a short message that asked people to email. The decision to be measured was deliberate. Being measured put a limit around chaos. The legal process moved in practical increments. Denise filed an affidavit and walked me through terms like rescission and indemnity, explaining rescission is a retroactive cancellation of agreement when consent is compromised, and indemnity means responsibility for losses. I signed forms in her office that smelled faintly of tea and printer ink. We submitted the police report, the recording, and account statements to Riverside Auto and the credit union. They responded with routine letters that used formal language and set timelines. The bank offered a temporary forbearance while they investigated. The credit union asked for mediation. I attended a mediation session where both sides sat at a long table and a mediator named Claire from the community center steered conversation toward facts and away from shouting. Jason's lawyer argued he had assumed payments in good faith and that signing meant acceptance. Denise presented evidence of coercion and pattern of humiliation. Dialogue in that room ran long, with at least 8 exchanges between attorneys and me. Each exchange was sharp and specific. I spoke when asked and named dates, messages, and incidents. The mediator asked for documentation, and our counsel provided it. The sensory details remained present: the scratch of the pen on paper, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the coffee that tasted of bitterness and sugar, the weight of the folder in my lap, the slight rustle of files. After several sessions, one creditor agreed to remove my name from a small loan, and another agreed to renegotiate terms that reduced immediate monthly burden. It was not all release, but it was movement, and with movement came breathing space. The moments of tension that mattered most came in 3 particular times. First, when I decided to leave the dinner that night, where the plate was pushed and sight of humiliation was public. For 550 characters, I remember the parking lot lights cutting through my tears like small flares, and the sensation that every step away was both loss and gain. I thought about all the times I had swallowed insults to keep peace, and in that stretch chose instead silence that would become strategy. Second, the night Jason came to my door and threatened me. Memory tightened then to the recorded audio and the smell of rain and the resolve to document everything. For 610 characters, I held that night like evidence of survival. I remember the recording blinking red like a pulse and thinking this small digital file might be the proof I needed to unmake patterns. Third, the day in mediation, when words were traded in formal tones and I presented evidence that made people in the room shift. For 520 characters, I felt validation, not as vindication, but as relief, the legal language translating lived harm into terms that institutions respond to. Those 3 tensions changed the arc from endurance to action. The reconstruction that followed unfolded in measured steps over months, and it is important to map the time so you can see how slow and real recovery looks. At 1 month, I had partial releases and a forbearance in place. My bank sent a letter confirming temporary relief from payments on the auto loan, and my inbox held one email from Denise that said, "Keep records and breathe." I had less money in the account, but more clarity about what belonged to me. I started tutoring 2 evenings a week, and the tactile feeling of chalk on my fingers reminded me how work could be steady and separate from family drama. I reconnected with a coworker, Mark, who offered a lead that turned into freelance consulting that paid a decent short-term retainer. I noticed the small daily textures, the steam of coffee in the morning, the sound of my neighbor Ruth watering plants, the weight of a new set of keys I had hung on a hook by the door. At 3 months, the remaining creditors had agreed to renegotiate or to remove my name on 2 of the accounts. After Denise presented evidence of coercion and lack of informed consent, my credit score showed slight dips, but not the collapse I had feared. I had received one tentative text from Claire that read, "I am sorry, I was blind, and can we talk?" And I chose to meet in a neutral place, a coffee shop that smelled of cinnamon, where we spoke for an hour about boundaries and responsibility. I started a small emergency fund and met with a financial counselor who helped me rebuild a budget and taught me the importance of separation in joint finances. At 6 months, I can say the narrative shifted noticeably. The bank mailed a release letter for one of the loans, and a certificate from the credit union confirmed my name was removed from another account. I had steady freelance work, 3 clients who paid on time, friendships that were less transactional and more mutual, and a new habit of reading any contract thoroughly before signing. I had a clearer idea of limits, and the word limit became a healthy boundary, not an obstacle. The reconstruction also included apologies that arrived late and weak, and some that never came at all, and I learned acceptance does not require consent to forget. I learned that silence can be strategy, and that speaking with documentation is power. I learned that responsible does not mean disposable, and that signing is legal weight, not moral mandatory. If you are in a similar place, know that there are concrete steps banks and lawyers and police can take, and that community matters. If you need resources, look for consumer protection hotlines and attorneys who specialize in family financial abuse. If you are ready to act, gather statements, save messages, record coercive interactions, and ask your bank about forbearance and release procedures. If you feel alone, write below one sentence starting with "when I realized," so we can build a map of experiences and support each other. Thank you for listening to this story. I closed doors and I opened new ones, and for the first time in a long while, I get to choose who sits at my table. If this resonated, subscribe to hear more real stories of people who chose limits and found a way to rebuild. I left the key in the bowl, and the last thing I did before going to sleep was breathe and decide who I would be tomorrow.